Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the Industry 4.0 Club. Thank you everyone for being here today. I'm Carol Mitchell-Lin, an Industry 4.0 Club co-founder. I'm a content marketer who's been working in manufacturing for 5 years. This LinkedIn Live format is new to us, so if you could bear with us today, we'll do our best to ensure that our technology cooperates with everyone. Our conversation today is titled Enabling Cooperation in Building Circular Value Chains by Engaging Stakeholders. And our guest today is Deborah Dull. Hi, Deborah. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to this.
We'll start with an introduction of the World Manufacturing Report, then move on to our conversation. We welcome your questions, and we'll test bringing on other Industry 4.0 founders to add to our conversation. Joining me today is Industry 4.0 co-founder Ann Wyatt. Hi, Ann.
Hey guys, I'm so excited for this conversation. And Deborah, it's so exciting to meet you and learn more about the circular supply chain and economy at large, because that's something that's really been a hot topic lately, if you know what I mean, with the supply chain. So yeah, but thank you, Carol. My name is Ann Wyatt. I am a co-founder of Industry 4.0 Club. We got our start there on Clubhouse, the app. In my real life, in my analog life, I am in the talent acquisition space. So that's a little bit more about me, and I'm ready to get this conversation started. What do you think, Carol?
Thanks, Ann. I'm really excited to have you in on this new media for the Industry 4.0 Club today. I'm glad that you're a part of that. And I'd like to let everybody know a little bit more about Deborah before we continue. Deborah is a returning guest for the Industry 4.0 Club, and we appreciate the time that you've given to us. Deborah is the founder of the Circular Supply Chain Network that explores the intersection of the circular economy and the supply chain, and the relationship between circularity and continuous improvement. She focuses on the need of supply chain strategies and operations worldwide, providing thought leadership on circular supply chains and strategy for reducing waste, cost, and improving time to value. Deborah holds supply chain and operation management degrees from Western Washington University and the University of Liverpool. Deborah is the author this year of the Circular Supply Chain 17 Common Questions, How Any Supply Chain Can Take the Next Step. So Deborah, thank you for joining us, and back to you.
Thank you for having me, and always strange to hear the author part. That's new. I also decided one of my COVID projects was to start my doctorate. So I'm going to attempt to collect a third degree here in the next 10 years. So it feels like a doable goal. And then I can become a supply chain doctor, which I think will be really fun. For everyone who's out there, I am 6 hours past the East Coast. So as I have my happy hour with me, just know that it is a time appropriate. 5 o'clock somewhere is here. And excited to share a couple ideas. So I was asked to come today to talk about engaging stakeholders in circular value chains. So I'm going to give just a really brief what is it that we're talking about if you're just joining, and then we'll go through 3 ways to engage stakeholders. None of these are going to be rocket science. We all know how to engage stakeholders. But I think it'll be a good reminder for us, especially in today's world where everything seems a little bit nuts. And I welcome questions, discussions, challenges, examples, and we'll go through the time like that. So first, hopefully, if you're watching, you know what a supply chain is. If you don't, you could Google it and a lot will show up now. So sort of an interesting part about being in supply chain is I've never gotten so many like magazine clipping, like newspaper clipping types from everyone in my life. And they say, oh my gosh, is this what you actually do? So supply chains are, of course, in the news. Circular economy is becoming a more understood term. But just to lay it out for everybody, today we're in an economy called the linear economy. Now, if you are not somebody who goes out to drinks with your friends and talks about like the type of economy we're sitting in, that's okay. Not many people do. It's called the linear economy today because our materials flow in a line. They start in the planet, we make something out of it, and we use it, and then after that, we declare it obsolete and we throw it away. The circular economy is a premise that says, what if instead of taking items from the planet, we actually take them from society? They're already in use, they're out there in the world. Maybe they're totally fine to be used and reused and resold as they are. Maybe they're a little dinged up and need to be slightly repaired. Maybe they're like really dinged up and could be taken apart into components and remanufactured into something else. Or as sort of the last resort, if it really cannot function in its current state, or the materials inside are so valuable in another state, we will recycle. Some people take recycle and circularity and put it kind of in the same box, but recycling is like not a great option in the land of circularity. And by doing that, starting with an item already and refurbishing it and putting it back into a value stream, we're able to get more money. And that material can add more value to society, to supply chains, et cetera, thus giving the name circular economy, because we're circulating materials and resources. This can happen with metals and plastics. It can also happen with water, heat, even bio scraps. You know, that's like composting. We've been doing that for a long time. So it's not a crazy to imagine idea, but the repercussions for supply chains, I think, are quite large. So we will no longer have these long, complex, hundreds of thousands of mile supply chains. Your iPhone travels 240,000 miles before it ever even gets to you, and you turn it on, all the different components. It's not going to happen anymore. We're going to see shorter, more simple supply chains that use local materials. So that is the quick and dirty of supply chain and circular economy. And I'll go now through one way to start engaging your stakeholders, and then we can get to the next two. So don't switch off when I say this one. Stay with us. The first one we're going to look at is really being clear on what problem it is we're trying to solve. And we're going to do that with standards. Wait, stay with us. Standards sometimes gets a bad rep. That sounds really boring, and it's really hard to develop standards. But they're really, really important, because how do I know that we're talking about the same area? You know, we've got supply chain standards brought to us mostly through the Association for Supply Chain Management SCORE model, the very long 1,000-page PDF that helps us to collaborate across supply chains so that we can all understand what we're talking about. At the Circular Supply Chain Network, we have what we're calling a transition model, the 7-step model that I'll briefly tell you what the steps are. And even if we can say, look, I'm trying to solve for this step, is anybody else working on this? Are you willing to collaborate with me? So that if you're working with your suppliers, which is probably who you're going to start with here, you can say, look, if this is my universe, this is where I'm starting, and we need your help on this. We obviously see the disruption in supply chain happening around the world right now, with border crossings and ports being congested. We're also legit running out of materials in the planet, which sounds mind-blowingly crazy, but we have under 50 years left of gold, tin, silver, tungsten. And all of these are really important for like electronics and running society. So we actually have a pretty big reason to start reusing the materials that we've already mined and processed and putting those back into the value chain. So how this works, here's the 7. And I can share a link if that's useful. It's up on the Circular Supply Chain Network website under the Learn button. It's the very first thing you'll see up there on these phases. So step 1, we call it identify. This is really taking a look at your value chains and saying, where do we have waste today that could be value tomorrow? What feels like an opportunity to take, let's say, a byproduct process waste in a manufacturing facility? You can tell most clearly because you have actual garbage that you're paying to dispose out the back. Those are great candidates for transforming into value chains via value streams. by finding a customer for them. We say value is defined in the eyes of our customer, and if our finished goods customer doesn't find a material valuable, then we need to go find another customer and sell it to them. So that's the idea. Scan, imagine a value stream map. It's the same kind of an idea, and note where the material comes off in every step. Step 2, we call it intensify. This is actually language from the circular economy community, and it means to use it more. So if you have items in your supply chain, let's say machines along your factory line, we want them to be in use all the time. In the future, I think we're going to do a lot more factory sharing than we're doing today. I think we're going to see a lot of collaboration among similar industries, like competitors are going to share the same line. And we're going to do that because we just won't have enough resources to build enough lines to only use them one shift a day. The third step we call narrow. This is classic lean management meets crazy transformational shortening your supply chains. We're seeing some interesting reshoring discussions. And this is the idea of, one great way to use less or emit less, use less fuel is just to not transport so much. And so this idea of narrow pulls both of those in. Fourth step, predict. So if we have value streams and waste streams, and we want those waste streams to become value streams, then we're going to have almost like finished good customers and waste stream customers. So 2 types of customers now, and we need to give them both a supply plan. They need to be able to plan their own production and what they're doing. So we need to know a lot about these materials. We don't love to talk about our waste, and so this can be an uncomfortable one for people. But when we get our hands around what is actually coming out that we're probably paying to dispose of, then we can start the right discussions. Number 5 of 7, slow. This is not the sexiest, and I don't think gets enough airtime. It's really about stretching the life of an item. Right to repair laws are being passed for consumers. But if we think about the industrial world, this is really our MRO, classic spare parts management, repairing and keeping our assets running as long as they can. So you might be thinking like, that's nothing new, and you're absolutely right, which is cool because we already know how to do probably 70% of circular supply chains. If we put the pieces together in the right way, we're actually there. So that's step 5, slow. Step 6 is called close. This is also language from the circular economy community. And it's what it sounds like. Probably the most common use case when you go out and Google this. This is the idea that as inputs into your process, everything is a secondary material. It was used before, and nothing came from the planet, including water that's been recycled, plastics that have been used before. Ideally, these are component pieces you can use again. Really interesting material science breakthroughs here in terms of growing materials instead of mining materials. It's estimated that of the 100 billion tons of material that enters the global economy each year, 60 billion, 60, could be grown with biology instead of mined, which I think is pretty rad. So that's something fun to look for. I also posted recently a somewhat jovial article from The Guardian on my LinkedIn page about sucking carbon out of the air and making vodka with it.
Yes.
Last, that kind of gets us into this last phase that we call capture. And I think this is specific to supply chains because we're the ones who go out and kind of figure out where we're getting our materials. Right now, we've got lots and lots of material floating out around in the world, ocean plastics, carbon in the air. We need some processes to bring those back in. Something you're wearing right now may have been reclaimed from ocean plastics, or maybe your laundry detergent container. Also, stop shipping water around everybody. If you're still getting liquid soap, stop. Start getting like don't pay to ship water around. That's really bad. For example, I use laundry sheets.
Yeah.
It works. But capture, the clothing producers of the world are not themselves going out into the ocean getting ocean plastics. There's somebody there. There's this growing industry on capturing items out of the environment. I think in the next couple of years, we're going to start mining landfill like Wally, like going through and coming up with good items that we've chucked in the past, and then we've chucked them away, we seal them. So basically the materials are like exactly the same as when we threw them away. And so we're going to go through and I think we're going to do that in the next 10 years. So step one, there it is. Let me know your thoughts, questions. Go for it.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know if you ever shop on, there's this company called H&M, but I don't know if you ever shop. H&M does a lot with recycled textiles and clothes.
As they
and
should.
I've bought several pieces and they last.
Is bad. So H&M has to step up because fast fashion is like not great for the world right now. So support brands who are looking to do that, but also everybody do your homework on how many miles did your $7.99 shirt travel to get to you? That's your homework.
Okay. I have a question for you, Deborah. Actually, first of all, I think you'll be a very good professor.
Thank you.
you have a way of taking a very deep topic that's very complicated and putting it in a way that's easily digestible, at least a beginning for conversation. So I think you're really good at that message. I do have a question about standards. If we could just go back.
Yeah, please.
Because the world is different. The EU and North America is very different, and that often comes up when the topic of standards or global standard comes up. I was wondering how would you envision the beginning of some sort of circular supply chain standards?
Really good question. Standards are such a massive topic. We've got data standards, we've got verbiage standards, language that we use. We've got, the shipping container was an innovate. It was like a transformational catalyst point for worldwide shipping, where previously we just didn't have any containers to put anything in. Pallet sizes do vary, and we do feel that when they cross borders. But at the same time, like if we end up with 6 major standards or even 12, as long as they can all talk to each other, it's not terrible. We're seeing the EU come out with directives around like cell phone chargers all have to be the same in the next couple of years. It's going to be a big blow to Apple, but in order to actually sell anything here, they have to do it. And so I think role of government can be there. It gets a little scary in America to talk about big government. People get a little freaked out by that. But sometimes we need somebody, like we need an adult to come in and say, you are required to play nice together. Because in a capitalist marketplace, we never will be motivated to collaborate. And so there's some of that needs to get started. So the shortest way to answer your question, I think, is we need to know what we're talking about first. So making sure we're all clear that this is not recycling. This is a massive transformation to shorten our supply chains from what they are today. And imagine we had 5% of the vessels on the ocean that we do today. Imagine that something in the Suez Canal or off the port of LA actually would be fine if there was a backup, because the vast majority of what we source comes from within 100 miles. And it sounds crazy, but we don't need to be importing a lot of what we're importing anymore. Need as in from a technology perspective. Financially, the economics of global trade are really weird. So it's confusing. I got a pepper grinder at Target in Seattle a couple months ago, and the pepper is from Vietnam, and then they shipped it all the way to South Africa to put in the grinder, and then they shipped it all the way to Seattle, and it cost me like $3. That is confusing to me. How anyone made money along that value chain is very confusing. But we can start to grow food now a lot closer. Science is really progressing. And about half the world lives in cities today. By 2050, that's going to be 80% of the world is going to live in mega cities. And I think we have enough material already in landfill that we don't really need to mine for a while. The vast majority of that 100 billion tons of material, 91 billion tons comes from the planet, and about 9 billion comes from other supply chains. And that ratio has to switch. Like, we're just going to run out. We just won't have items anymore. And selfishly, I really like having a cell phone and air conditioning comfort. So we've really got to get our act together.
Deborah, you mentioned the food industry a little bit there, and I've seen some examples of the circular economy within some food manufacturers, where they either sell the waste or they reuse the waste to create new products.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you think the food industry is going to be the leader in this.
They certainly can be. And, the advantage that food has is among the circular economy practitioner community, they say often that only thing that should be consumed in a circular economy is food, because we have to eat. That's not something we can really reuse. But we have a tremendous amount of food waste in society as it is today. And food production, the value chain of food production produces a shocking amount of waste of fine food that's good to eat. There's examples of this. When I used to live in Seattle, I had an imperfect produce subscription where perfectly good food that just looks a little ugly would come to my house, and all of that previously had been thrown away, which is kind of crazy. But I do think they're in a good position to lead. There's very interesting, you can tell it's happy over here, very interesting alcohol industry examples. There's one in Seattle called Westland Whiskey. And the process of making whiskey, you kind of make beer first, and then you move on and distill that. And so they have the same idea as breweries do, is that they get the sugar out of the grains, and then they're spent, but they still have nutrition in them. So we see companies like Regrained coming up, and they're making granola bars out of spent grains. We see one brewery is actually growing algae in their runoff and making that into supplements, like no fish oil supplements. We're seeing one company in the UK called Toast is actually taking bread from the supermarkets that has passed its sell-by date but is perfectly fine, and they actually make beer out of that. So there's very interesting kind of like those original Reese's peanut butter cup commercials, like, you got peanut butter in my chocolate. And that's actually happening, and so we're seeing some co-location of factories where they can kind of share and use the same ingredients. So I think you're spot on. It's a very interesting one to start with because everybody can relate to food. So it's a nice one. And really cool stuff on like lab grown meat, because y'all have to stop eating beef. It's like really bad for the planet. And they take so much food just to make one little pound of beef that humans could be eating. So I think lab grown meat is very interesting. Alternative protein sources like bugs are going to be more common because they grow really fast. Watch this space.
If it's okay, can I do just a quick reset? Because
Yes,
I did find that the 7 steps that you just went over on the Circular Supply Chain Network website. And I wanted to let everybody listening know that I posted the link to the chat under the event. So you can go to the chat under the event there and find the link to that. And if you're just now joining us, if you have any questions for Deborah, please let us know. We'd be happy to bring those up for her on your behalf. And I think that we've actually should be getting some Clubhouse traffic as well. So welcome to anybody that could be joining us directly from the Clubhouse app too. If you are just now kind of catching us here on LinkedIn Live, my name is Wyatt. I'm an Industry 4.0 co-founder. I'm joined with Carolyn Mitchell, who's also an Industry 4.0 co-founder, and we are talking to Deborah Dull today on the circular supply chain, which we all know is a really hot topic right now. So Deborah just kind of went over, gave us a great synopsis for what the supply chain is and being in a linear versus a circular supply chain. and then kind of talking about how the food and bev industry is really making big steps towards already adopting some of the circular supply chain methodologies. So this has been a really good conversation so far, and I'm learning a lot. So
Yay, that's
yeah,
excellent. And thank you for finding that link. That's really helpful.
for
And
sure. Yeah.
Link, could you please post that link again? I think one of the comments, I think, I don't know what happened to the link.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you a question, Deborah, on, I'd like to go back to engaging stakeholders.
Yep.
And yesterday you posted on LinkedIn, um, the problem with supply chains isn't that we don't know how to fix it, it's that there's no one person to listen to. In supply chain, there's no one in charge. And the question you posed to your followers were, if you were in charge all of it for 3 weeks, how would you fix it? But I don't think you answered it yourself.
Well, I don't want to give away my answer yet. Yeah. So are you asking me to answer?
uh, I guess, well, you don't have to give everything away, no. Maybe where would you start as far as engaging stakeholders?
Yeah, exactly. So I think this actually does tie in well to the second of 3 ways I'll share today. So my promise is we'll get through 3 ways to engage your stakeholders. And I posted that with a snippet on of a news article, and not to dig on journalists, because for a lot of newspapers, they didn't cover anything around supply chain previously. And I think it was actually the New York Times that said, look, we didn't used to even have a column around this, and now this is our hottest topic. And so everyone's learning about supply chain, learning how to talk about supply chain. So I shouldn't be too critical. But at the same time, there's 53 million people in America that work in supply chain in some way. 37% of America's workforce, broadly, in a very, very generous definition of the word supply chain, works in supply chain. That's only in America. And so it's just not fathomable to me that no one knows how to solve the problem. The challenge is nobody's in charge. We live in an outsourced world. Some supply chains are vertically integrated, but not all the way, not from every single input, every single raw material. Rarely do people own their own ocean vessel. I mean, we have to work with partners. That's the whole point of supply chain. And so that's the push behind my question. And I gave it 3 weeks because it's an 11-day sailing time between the Pearl River Delta in China, where most electronics are built, and the port of LA. And so I figure if you have 3 weeks, then it's like, you're set, fine. I think there's a great number of items inside of these containers that really don't have need to be in society. They're frivolous and they're consumer driven, and they're going to be used for less than 2 hours, and they're going to be thrown away. And so I think the majority of what's actually plugging up the pipelines today is just our own fault. After 100 years of being driven by what's called planned obsolescence, where basically companies figure out how long should this thing last, and they make it as short as they can that we'll still pay for. So it's like paper coffee cups, even plastic bags that we have to pay for now, we do. Moving all the way up to how fast can we have you buy a new cell phone? And that really shouldn't happen. And it didn't used to happen. It all started in 1924, but we're not going to do that story today. But that's the first time we know that there's a meeting intentionally reducing, just undercutting the technology innovations that we'd had up until that point, and like halving the life of something to make sure that they could stay in business. So all that to say, the second way that you can engage stakeholders for circular value chains, I think, is to put it out in the world. So step one was really define the problem and be clear on, like, kind of imagine a you are here map. That's why we made that 7-step transition model, and just at least figure out where are you on this map. And I apologize, the church next to me is going to tell us it's 7 p.m. So you're going to hear that chime. And then once you figure out where you're trying to solve the problem, there are not a lack of places to go talk about, especially marketplaces. more and more marketplaces are coming up for all types of product exchanges. And again, if you're in the B2B world, you can say, obviously, we've been doing this for years. We have ways to exchange excess spare parts. Some spare parts are like really big and expensive, but it usually happens off books. So it's hard to put things back into our ERP system once they've come out. And so the role of marketplaces, I think, will be quite interesting. Over time, I think there will be more regulation of marketplaces. But for now, they're all relatively private companies. But there are plenty of forums, discussion groups. This is why we started the Circular Supply Chain Network. We've continued to be surprised on how much traction we get and how people are curious and they want a place to be able to talk about what to do next. So this second way to exchange your stakeholders is to give a platform to discuss. It can be scary and sometimes competitors need to talk. And so we have some forums that are set up specifically to allow for pre-competitive discussions. So they can be hosted by a third party and facilitated in a way that doesn't reveal anything close to IP. And we can start having the discussions we really need to about how are we all going to figure out how to get this material to circulate? How do we keep items local for as long as possible so that we actually just make a ton more money out of them? So second way is you've got to put it out in the world, and finding the place to put it, I think, can be a challenge, especially around the coming together of circularity and supply chain. Thank you, Jan, that you're absolutely right. 1924 light bulbs, back room, very clandestine meeting. It was like GE, Phillips, like everybody was there.
I heard about that.
Yes. And it was like right as Henry Ford was starting mass production, like he just started the term. It was right when the second industrial revolution was coming. Like it was like a perfect storm. And everyone was like, this is the best idea. We're going to stay in business for forever. And then now we realize we're actually running out of material. So that is my way number 2 to engage your stakeholders. Carol, we've lost your audio somehow.
No, I was on mute for a few minutes, just because I don't want my household to infringe. That's a great step number 2, and I wanted to talk about something that was brought up in the World Manufacturing Forum report, and that was the number 3 recommendation. Oh, let me get it out. Oh, that's number 3 recommendation, which involves stakeholders. And I wanted to know, within the report, something important was building trust. Because without building trust, collaboration is difficult. And within building a marketplace and establishing that something that's strong, and I was wondering, how would you approach that particular challenge?
Good question. And if everybody can believe it, we did not plan this session, but this perfectly relates to my engagement point number 3. So third way to engage stakeholders, the first one was, let's make sure we all understand what we're trying to solve for. The second is put that out into the world, find the right way to collaborate. And the third, I think, is to set joint goals. But I don't mean 2025 or 2030 goals. I mean like a December goal. So something that would take 1 or 2 months that's small. And don't make them bigger then. Just keep making small, achievable goals that we can all do in addition to our day jobs. And it's pretty remarkable how much we can get done actually with just a couple hours here and there to get these very small, achievable steps forward. There's a lot of debate on incremental change versus transformation, but I suspect what feels incremental to us, if we're setting out towards a really crazy idea, I think one day we kind of wake up and we go like, oh man, the last 24 months of incremental little bits has brought us to this pretty amazing, crazy place that we could still be in the planning committee for 2 years trying to figure out how we're going to pull it off. But getting those joint goals set, met, and celebrated together, I think is a wonderful way to set trust, because at the end of the day, this really comes down to humans. We build credibility by doing what we say we're going to do, and then credibility leads to trust. And so it all comes out. If you talk to a child in the last 5 years in school, they talk about their emotional bank account and helping each other to fill their buckets. And I think it's kind of like that, but with professionals. We have to figure out how to make decisions together and how to kind of make progress together. But if we keep the stakes low until we're at a point where our organizations do actually have an understanding and a way of working together, then you can kind of set some crazier goals that we put more on the line, we put real money, big investments, but we need to lead up to that. We're not going to go in. I just saw an article posted that says in order for the world supply chains to meet their emissions goals, we need $100 trillion. We don't have that much money in the world. So we have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of creative solutions we're going to need to identify. And so that would be my way number 3. So first, figure out what problem we're solving. Second, put it into the right forum. And third, set some joint goals. Very simple, easy, like turn up to the first meeting would be a great first goal. Everyone celebrates, we all made it here. And then start building real progress and traction from there. Thoughts, questions?
I mean, I think in the past few years, there's really been an interesting push on the consumer side of things. For example, like myself, I love antiques. So if I need a piece of furniture, I like to go to the antique store. And I enjoy painting and stuff like that. So I'll paint it and just do some easy things to kind of update it. But I think that's something that we can do, or we can shop local. There's a whole shop local movement. So I think that, as a consumer, there's definitely things that we can do from an industrial perspective. I did get to work with a greenfield site. They did, they were actually a Canadian company, but they make pet food. And one of their biggest goals was to be a completely sustainable company. So when they wanted to come to the South Central Kentucky area, they actually lined up local area suppliers. So they work directly with a catfish farm, for example, to make their product and some other things like that. So I think that there's definitely some creative and ingenious ways, out there to get the push for the circular economy going. But it's really the supply chain here in the States. I know you're in Barcelona, so I don't know if it's kind of the same there, but it's a big deal right now. Everybody is kind of talking about it. And when I first heard about it, I think another recruiter told me about it. And I was like, no, I haven't heard anything about this. And so then I had a call with an SME, right? And then they were talking about it. I was like, huh, you know what? Another recruiter was just telling me about this. And then, one of my friends that's actually, I believe in systems integration, was posting about it. And I was like, because these are 3 separate groups that, they interface, but not together. You don't ever see them all together, right? And so I was like, well, something's up. It's your sign, right? It's definitely trending. So it's, when you think about the supply chain and some of the issues and struggles that you're facing right now, what do you think about the concept of decentralization? And is that kind of related to the circular supply chain, the circular economy? And if so, could you elaborate a little bit more on that for us?
Short answer, yes, it is. Longer answer, we are seeing cool stuff happening here. So the premise, again, of a circular supply chain is to find, transform, and reuse materials. Let's call it regionally. Let's give you a couple 100 miles, which seems really hard. But we're starting to see a few very interesting shifts and leading to where I think manufacturing is going, which I'll tell you. I think the day of the mega factory is over. The idea that we have to pull everything in from all corners of the world to build it really efficiently in this one place that we're then going to move 3 years from now, because then we decided another country is going to be like a little bit cheaper. So we're going to move the entire thing over and train a whole bunch of new people. And did we actually save any money anyway? We're not sure. So instead, we're going to see these micro factories. The extreme of this is like from Unilever. They just put an entire food production line in a 40-foot container. Getting a question about automotive. Stick with me. I'll come back to automotive. 40-foot container food production line. So the idea is they could plop one of these down in a local market, produce what they need for the next couple of months, let's say, and then move it on to someplace else. We're also seeing the combination of 3D printing and 5G technologies to print in transit. So I think in the future, we're going to have value added in transit and non-value added in transit, which essentially means, imagine that we need to transform a bunch of trash. We just found, like WALL-E, we put it in one side, and then as it drives, let's say an hour or two away, everything inside has been processed on the way. So we actually don't have to have centralized processing. We can do it kind of as we move. So I think this will become more and more of a trend. Where I think we're actually going to end up at the end of the day is we have enough factories just about in most geographies. There's some that could use more infrastructure, but we don't always need all of our factories. We are not running them all at 3 shifts. And so imagine a world, and I mentioned this earlier, where I think competitors are going to actually be on the same line. Imagine in a market, a decent sized market, call it a state in America. And you're going to have, the textiles factory, and you're going to have an automotive factory, and you're going to have food and bev factory. And all those companies are going to submit orders online, and like they're routed for transportation today, I think they're going to be routed for manufacturing tomorrow. So your factory planner might sit in, I don't know, let's say in Egypt. They could drop an order for Michigan, and then it will be built in Michigan. It won't go to a central factory and have to be shipped around. So I think that's where it's headed. I think decentralization is pretty massive if the whole point is to leave. We fuss with materials too much. We kind of leave them alone, and they'll keep putting money in the economy, but we keep doing stuff to it, shipping it all over and recycling it. And plastic can only be recycled 1.8 times, everybody. So sometimes the things you recycle don't get recycled, they get thrown away. Also, online returns, they usually get thrown away. But I want to actually answer the automotive industry question, and it's a good one because actually automotive is further than some industries are, and you might all roll your eyes at this when you're like, that's not a circular economy. But certified pre-owned cars now is very common. This is the hallmark of a circular supply chain idea of how do we take a car, leave it as itself, maybe do a little bit of repair, and then sell it to somebody for a lot of money compared to what we put into it. There's a manufacturer in France called Renault. They've been very open on how much they've doubled down and tripled down on circular operations, and they're making a ton of money from it, and they're sharing that they're making a ton of money from it. And I think it's a good one for us to look at and understand. Now, we know we're transitioning to electric vehicles, yes, and we have a whole bunch of vehicles already on the road that are not electric. I just also saw an article recently about a company that can retrofit existing, it's actually for semi-trucks, and they can, instead of sucking the carbon out of the air, they suck the carbon from the tailpipe. They capture 90% of the carbon produced, and then the idea is that then that carbon can be produced to make items, maybe even fuel, which means we could retrofit these to kind of almost fuel themselves and have the fuel go longer, which fuel doesn't have to be made from fossil fuels either. We could make it from something else. So anyway, very, very exciting. The science is picking up. And actually, one of my biggest fears is that the scientists are going to outpace us in supply chain. And we're going to end up with exactly the same supply chains that we have today, long and everything, with just different materials. And I worry that's a very real potential for our future. And then we're not really solving any of our problems in supply chain. So I think we really need to do both, reimagine what materials could look like, reimagine the business model, but also take a look at our operations and say, how can we imagine this role of decentralization, like you asked?
That was very informative. Thank you so much for sharing that. Like, I am just thinking about, I like the trucks that, fuel themselves. That's really good information to know. Yeah, automotive is, we're definitely going electric. So, right now, my focus when I'm looking down that path, I'm kind of seeing it as being, it's going to be I'm not going to say rough few years. I think rough's the wrong word, but it's definitely going to be a transitionary few years for them.
Yes,
Just because they're going to have to be able to, they're going to have to, retool and do all of that. So I like this idea of manufacturing on the go. That's very interesting. That's a very interesting and new concept to me. So thank you for sharing that. And I'll have to dive into that a little bit more, do some
very fun.
research. Yeah.
I was just going to add, the U.S. Army
Okay.
is also, like, the military is looking into this too. So as you look at 3D printing on the go, they've actually put a couple of ideas out in the world. So it exists.
I think the 3D printing on the go ties into maybe something I'd like to talk about for a few minutes, Deborah, is the Industry 4.0 and digitization of the factory floor, where you 3D print components as needed. And I was wondering where you think we are in that regard of Industry 4.0 and where we still have to go.
Yeah, so here's the pickle. We have one camp working towards lights out manufacturing, and it's called that because computers and robots are going to run on everything, so you don't need to have the lights on if there's no humans. But that's based on the premise that we're going to build new stuff, a lot of new stuff continuously. Then we have the other camp, circular camp, that says, when we think about items in society, we have to stop imagining that we start with raw materials. Instead, we start with an item already. And right now, we haven't yet taught machines how to diagnose other machines, for the most part. Yes, it's some of it. But imagine a complex pump on a factory line. And even in a lights out manufacturing type of scenario, you still need humans to help the machines run, right? This is also a really fun time. It's 7:17, and for some reason the church goes off for 45 seconds. So here we go. Sorry about that. I don't know why.
I love it.
But we need a human to look at the machine and figure out what's going on. Now, we are taking meaningful steps to what I call intelligent cobots. So if you imagine engineers with an augmented reality headset on, and the machine has enough sensors on it that it can say, hey, human, this specific piece over here is the thing that's faulty. So we're not far away from machines fixing other machines. And once that happens, one, panic, because that's really scary, kind of. But then we can actually start to get to the world where we're remanufacturing and repairing. And the amount that we make new is ideally going to be really small, because it's not really the premise. The premise is we need to use what we already have, and reuse and repair. Now, again, as we get into innovations in material science, this building new world may not seem so bad if we have a good way to capture and reuse the materials that come out of it. So if it's something like textiles, we should repair and refashion them as much as we can. But if we have a way to take your favorite pair of jeans and make it into the next cool style, but retain the majority of the jean, that is something that could be kind of interesting. So I think both camps will happen, but the guidance as we ask a very good question, and it's where manufacturing is going. The underlying premise is still a linear economy of, how do we digitize to have faster turns, higher throughput, but in a circular economy, we don't measure by turns, we measure by utilization. So how much is one item used, which includes our factory floors.
Thanks very much, Deborah. There's so much there.
Yeah, that's that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
But it's all very informative. I mean, I love this conversation because I've had kind of the same ideas for a long time. I mean, like before I knew really what the actual term of like circular economy, a circular supply chain was. But I'm thinking, you know, I just like I just think about stuff. I think too much. It's a problem. But so I'm thinking about the way things are and the way, you know, that manufacturing is going. And I'm thinking, you know, okay, so like Tesla, for example, they use customization in their lines, which is kind of a new and different thing for manufacturing. You usually don't see a whole lot of like on-site customization like that, like the ability to customize within the line. So I'm thinking about that and I'm like, you know, it's just a really interesting concept, like this idea of customization. I think that like, you know, obviously the big three are very inspired by Tesla, you know, so much that they're kind of turning into more of car production makers into software makers, right? Essentially. So, you know, they're doing this, but then you're kind of thinking about like everybody else, right? Because you got like, you know, with every industry sector, there's like, you know, your like big three, right? And then you've got all the suppliers that kind of offshoot from that. But I really think this is a really exciting time for like SMEs and OEMs because I feel like they could really, there's a lot of capacity for them to take on this idea of customization. And there's a really large capacity for them to take on like what you're saying, like maybe like 3D in progress or something like that. But I think it's going to be more niche than it is. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's going to give more of an opportunity for economic growth. Like, I don't think it's going to be one of these situations where it's like, oh, like the plant shut down. I think you're going to have like more plants.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And I think they're going to be repair. So here are some nearly closing thoughts. Very interesting, the world of 4.0. And some folks are saying like, well, 5.0 is going to be about mass individualization and lot size one. Everything will be hyper custom, hyper individual. And my pushback is like, man, we're still in 4.0, and I don't even think we're really clear on what this industrial revolution fully entails. I argue we're going to do it in this industrial revolution, this idea of lot size one, distinct customization. Imagine going up to a soda fountain in the middle of a city and like, oh, hey, Deborah, here's your perfect blend of what you prefer to have. It's not so crazy to think that that's around the corner because we can do it today. Here we go again on repair. I'm going to beat this drum. If, again, we live in a society where we start with an item first, instead of manufacturing it from scratch to whatever the consumer's whims are, we already are in lot size one. Everything becomes a unique item. This is where the idea of material passports or tracking over like life over life, how many people have touched this item and used it, where was it, is it safe, blah, blah, blah. And that's going to become really, really important. And I know everyone's like, Deborah, we're not going to live in a world where everything is remanufactured. I think we might. But even if we are in the land where everything is mass customized, we need to get the materials from someplace that is not the planet. And so while recycling is not the loop of first resort, the idea of bringing in circular materials, which again could come from biology, that to make whatever it is that we need. If we go loop back to textiles, because we talked about H&M at the very beginning of this, imagine going clothing shopping where you don't really have to go because they have a digital scan of you, and then you can like get items that actually look good on you and they cut it to your body. This is an example of hyper customization, individualization. This is happening in malls, mostly in Asian malls, but it happens where you go get scanned and then you have perfectly made to you items, which is phenomenal because how many pairs of jeans do you need to own in your closet if one of them actually fit you,
right?
Instead of having the like 15 pairs that we know we have in the bottom drawer and we never use them because we're like, maybe today, you know, COVID did not help. But if we think about the land of utilization and driving use up, and that's what circularity is all about, we don't need to have that much material sitting, not adding value to anyone, just sitting. It's basically in landfill. It just happens to be in your drawer, which is not what we're talking about. So we will be moving more to the land of sharing economy. Thanks, Mike, for Stitch Fix 2.0. Yes. And my last challenge, since I brought up textiles again, is we talk a lot about circular materials and we don't talk a lot about circular operations. So as we're like imagining a sharing program for clothes, as we're cleaning those clothes, we should not ship them to one central place in America by 2-day air and then use lots of primary materials to wash them, then package them in a primary material and send it back by 2-day air. We're gonna have to figure out a way to clean and share more regionally and cleaner. Otherwise, we're just sort of making the problem worse. And so we can certainly debate which one is less bad, making a new pair of jeans or 2-day airing a pair of jeans and cleaning it. But that's not what the future's about. We're not trying to pick the lesser of two bads. We're trying to actually regenerate the environment, because if we continue on our course, our food systems will collapse and we cannot survive. So there's like a couple of really big catalyst points for us to take this quite seriously. But it's a good, I mean, this is all good news. I don't mean to end on such a, like, the comet's coming. But it's a pretty news. Cool space.
I think there's already apps out there that use the VR function in your phone that you can already scan and do. And I think it's great because like I'm Amazon with you. I mean, I'm tired of buying clothes and then I'm just not fit. And that's really that's the hard part about shopping online. You know, that's why it's like I don't think malls will exist in the future. I think everything, all that stuff will be done online. So that's an important part of getting to that step for sure. Yeah,
definitely.
I think it's exciting. I'm here for it.
Yeah.
Deborah, did you want to leave that as your closing, or did you want to add something more? Maybe a note about your book?
Sure. I'd like to leave us on a happy note. Something I do talk about in the book, and just for folks to know, it's available on Amazon, print on demand, or on Kindle, and it will take you a couple hours to read. The idea is it would be like sitting down for a bottle of wine with me, and that's about as much time as it would take you to read the book. Very simple language. It's similar to how I communicate in breaking down big ideas into small pieces. But my point is, something I talk about in there is that supply chain professionals have a great deal of power, and we don't typically talk about how much power we do hold. We make the decisions on what's around the world. Nothing is moved if we don't move it. Nothing is built if we don't build it. It's our decisions. We're kind of puppeteers in a lot of ways. And it's really up to us to figure out, what does the future look like? Where do we want to source from? Where do we want to build or decentralize? And so I think we can all feel quite empowered that we are the ones that will get us out of the snarl that we're in right now. We can reach out and help educate the reporters around us on how to talk about supply chain, but do it in a kind and supportive way. But now is our chance. You know, this is kind of our spotlight to lose. And we have a slice of time here to make decisions based off of risk and what's best for our supply chain and not necessarily cost. And so I'd love to leave everybody with the idea that now is really an amazing time to be in this profession. We all exist out there. Thank heavens for the internet and for silly Zoom calls and live editions like this, because this is how we can find each other, and this is how we can get these ideas to grow.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for the positive closing comments. And did you want to add?
Yeah, no, I loved having this conversation with you. I love your energy. This is just, it's so nice, you know, when we're talking about the circular economy and supply chain, to have this type of positivity, but also the ability to really break it down and go over the concepts in more detail. So I really appreciate you coming and speaking with us on this today. And I know that we just connected on LinkedIn, so I'm really excited to network with you a little bit more, because I think you know, I love some of your thoughts on circular supply chain. So thank you for coming and sharing with us, and I'm inspired. So I hope everybody else out there is too. Yeah.
I wanted to close on this note to let everybody know that there's a link for the World Manufacturing Forum report in the comments. And following our broadcast today, I'll be adding the link for Deborah's book. So anyone that's reviewing this broadcast after live, they'll have access to all of the resources we've discussed today. And I would like to invite anyone listening today, um, if they like having conversations like this, they can also join us on Clubhouse app Monday through Thursday at 12:30 p.m. Except for Wednesdays, fireside chat is 11:30 a.m. So, as a closing note, thank you again so much, Deborah, and we hope to see you again someday.
Thank you so much for having
Definitely.
me.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye.
Anne.
Yes. Thank you, guys.